making videos now that it's 100% finished. I apologize if the audio is not perfect, got a lot of road noise. Basically, this is the Pursuit Hellcat. To the best of my knowledge, it's the first one, probably still the only one. Reason being, it's actually a lot easier to convert a civilian Charger into a Hellcat than a Pursuit Charger. And now when I say Pursuit, this is not the same thing as an RT or an SE, SXT. I'm actually posting another video explaining the differences. So those of you who say they're the same, they are not the same. First difference, of course, you've got the steel police wheels. You have different brakes. They have better brakes than the standard RT, not quite as much as a Scat Pack. Cooling system is totally different. The main thing is the wiring. The wiring and the transmissions, completely different. Especially, I believe it's 15 to 20 year models. 2015, the transmission is it's shifted into gear with a cable operated column shifter. All 15 of civilian Chargers are electronically shifted through an electronic floor shifter. So that was the biggest difficulty with building this car, was getting that electronic ZF Hellcat transmission to shift. So here's the interior setup that I currently have. Is the electronic floor shifter. This is a Hellcat floor shifter. They actually use the same part number floor shifter for all of the civilian cars. SXT, RT, Scat Pack, Hellcat, they're all the same. Dodge Charger, Dodge Challenger, Durango uses them. It's used in a lot of different Dodge vehicles. Here's the controllers for the lights. The lights are pretty much just for show right now. I do security contracting as well, but I don't really use this vehicle for work. This is my personally owned vehicle, POV, for a lot of people who've been asking that as well. I do not use this for the police department. I do work in law enforcement, but this is not a law enforcement vehicle. I built it because I love cop cars and I love Hellcats. So that's pretty much, there's no further explanation beyond that. Some people don't like that. That's not my problem. I've seen people put Hellcats and things that I don't like. So, but there's still a hole right here for where the column shifter was. As I explained earlier about the cable shifted column shifter. So, in order to get this electronic shifter to work, I literally had to change every single wire on this car, from bumper to bumper, from floor to ceiling. I had the entire interior out. I had the bumpers off. I had everything apart. All the wires had to change except for the wires inside the doors. Reason being, the harness that has to plug into this shifter did not exist on the police harness. Also, the body control module and several other modules were different. So in the process, since I went ahead and changed out the entire body harness, I went ahead and got all of the modules, the suspension module, the Hellcat stereo for the performance pages and all those sort of controls, 200-mile-an-hour gauges, red push-button start. Pretty much went ahead and got everything that a Hellcat would have, since I already had to replace all of the wiring. Now, if you did this on a civilian Charger with a transmission that you could made up to a Hellcat, it may not be a ZF Hellcat transmission, but say if it's still a transmission out of a Scat Pack or so, still a good transmission that you can made up to the Hellcat engine, you don't have to do all that with the wiring. There's a lot less that would be involved. But with a Pursuit, they're wired for police, and their police functions, inputs, outputs, all sorts of things that the police Pursuit models have that the civilian cars just don't. So that explains the transmission portion of it. Now the engine up front. This is a legitimate 6.2 liter Hellcat engine that was pulled from a 2018 Dodge Challenger. So that's another thing that's interesting. This build took me a total of 8 months, and most of that time was sourcing parts. What I didn't realize was how particular these newer Dodges are about all of the parts coming from the same car. So I figured a 2018 Hellcat engine, that's fine to match up with the 2016 wire harness and modules, PCM and all of that I had. I was wrong. Once I got everything together, the car would run, but it would go into limp mode. So 2016, 15-16, there was a mass airflow sensor right here. Mass airflow sensor in 2017 was replaced with just an IAT sensor, internal air temperature sensor. The MAF was done away with completely, and apparently there were some changes with the map sensors. There are 4 map sensors around the engine. There's one here, there's one here, and there's a couple others. There's actually 2 right here, 1 right here. So the map sensors, I had to replace them with 2016, 15-16 map sensors. I also had to replace the throttle with the 2015-16 accelerator pedal, throttle position sensor. As far as the mass airflow, I wound up buying an IAT sensor. No, excuse me. It had an IAT for the 2018. I had to add a mass airflow to make it compliant with the 2016 setup. So I bought a mass airflow sensor with a repair connector, repair kit, and I actually wired it myself into the engine and the engine wiring harness and the PCM, the open pin for the PCM. So once that was done, ran great. Now there are some other things on the front end that I ran into. Up until the very late model Hellcats, the Hellcats still have pump-driven, belt-driven power steering pumps. Most civilian models have the electronic power steering pump, which this car did as well. The police car had an electronic power steering pump. Now, because it was a 2015 rear-wheel drive Pursuit, it was actually built into the rack and pinion. The all-wheel drive Pursuits still have the same external pump that most of the civilian vehicles have. Because of that, the whole rack and pinion had to be replaced. So I had to replace the rack and pinion with a Hellcat rack and pinion that was capable of driving the power steering off of the belt-driven pump. Additionally, the entire cooling system is different. You have the cooler for the supercharger. You have an additional oil cooler, radiator, AC condenser, all of that is different for the Hellcat. Whole cooling system had to change. Drive shaft is a different length. Transmission is a little bit longer for the Hellcat, so the drive shaft has to be either shortened, which is what I did. You can either find a Hellcat transmission or you can get what you have shortened. So that's what I wound up doing with that. And additionally, you have to run all of the cooling lines for the supercharger, and you have to get a bigger fuel supply line. SXT, RT, Pursuit, anything below a 6.4, you're going to have to upgrade that fuel supply line. It's just too small. In addition to that, you have to change the pumps. Pumps aren't cheap either. I think I spent almost $1,000 just for one of them, and there's 2 pumps. The secondary pump is not quite as expensive, but even still. And that's mostly what had to be done to get this to work. The only module on this car that didn't change was the one under here, which is the ABS module, anti-lock braking system module. Another really common question that I get about this car is, why did I leave the Pursuit front bumper cover? I didn't in the rear. In the rear, I added the Hellcat bumper cover, the Hellcat trunk lid, wing, all of that. The front, I left the police bumper. Why? Because I wanted to keep the police look of it, and also I wanted to have the push bumper on it, again, to add to the police look. I considered putting the SRT bumper cover with the push bumper, but the only way to make that work would be to either custom fabricate brackets, which are not as sturdy, that would come out of the thinner grill for the SRT, or to basically mutilate the front of the bumper, which I've seen a lot of people do, and I just didn't want to do that. So it also gives it more of a sleeper look. Still looks like a police car, able to mount the push bumper without having to mutilate the front bumper, and it has kind of a business in the front, party in the back kind of a look. So then people ask, if I wanted to keep the police look in the front, why change the hood? Well, answer is I had to change the hood, otherwise the engine wouldn't fit. The Hellcat supercharger sits up so high that the factory hood just would not fit, because I actually did consider leaving the Pursuit hood on it. Another thing I can mention is these inserts down here. On the Pursuits, the bottom slot is open, which feeds a brake cooling tunnel that cools the brakes. I basically opened up the other two slots for the Hellcat coolers versus where the SRT bumper has large openings here for airflow for those coolers. That's how I opened it up better to give more airflow to them, so it works as good as a Hellcat. Now I'll explain the brakes. That's the first thing that a lot of true Mopar people look at when they see a car that looks like a Hellcat. They'll look at the brakes, try and figure out, is that a real Hellcat? Of course, this car does not have Brembos, and I know that behind this big open Hellcat rim looks like a small brake. Now, the rear is smaller, of course. The front is a lot bigger. It's almost the size of a Brembo, not quite as many pistons. But the reason I chose to stay with the police brakes, there were a couple reasons. One is, I've driven these vehicles in working situations at high speeds, slow down, speed up, working through traffic. They never faded on me, always stopped hard, quick, short distance, never had a problem with them. I've had Hellcats. I've driven them on the track, taken them to drag strip, things like that. The brakes faded so fast. From high speeds, they fade fast, and once they fade, the whole car starts shaking like crazy. Now, the other reason is the cost. A rotor for a Pursuit Charger, brand new rotor, is about $80. Brand new rotor for a Hellcat is $1,000. Same goes for the calipers, the pads, everything. It's way more expensive. Now the wheels, I had to change the wheels because otherwise I wasn't going to get any traction. Put the wider Hellcat rim on the back. I also added the Hellcat active suspension shocks, and I added the springs for the Hellcat, which brought the back down significantly, which also added to better traction. The Pursuits, they sit up high because they're intended for police to have a lot of gear, you know, bulletproof vests, ammunition, weapons, all that sort of thing in the trunk. So they need the stronger suspension, but it weakens the traction. Then there's why keep the police wheels in the front. Simply put, I had bought a full set of 4 Hellcat rims. They did not fit on the front. The Pursuit has some suspension components that are different than the Hellcat, to where the Hellcat rim was touching on the suspension and it was stopping the rim from being able to turn. Now, I'm sure I could change out those parts for Hellcat parts to where it would fit, but I actually grew to like having the police wheels in the front because it went with the rest of the police appearance in the front of the car. Now I'll go over the interior. So I found a guy online, Facebook Marketplace, who actually made me a really good offer on this interior that I wound up switching out the Pursuit interior from. Black and red, suede on the doors. You have suede leather mix on the seats. Front seats are vented and heated. Back seats are heated. I went ahead and did the civilian center console. Initially, I had a police center console still in the car with the floor shifter rigged into it. But I just, without all the radios and all the other type of equipment in this car, I only had the lights and a siren. So the controller is this big, so I just went ahead and rigged it in the front of the civilian console. Gives me the extra storage and all that sort of stuff. Flat bottom, SRT, heated steering wheel. The headliner had to change. On the Pursuits with Bluetooth for the phone and music and all that, the microphones are in the rearview mirror. On all civilian models, the microphones are in the headliner. When I changed all the wiring for the Hellcat wiring, I had to get the headliner for the phone microphones that are built into that. Of course, explained earlier, I changed Hellcat stereo, has navigation. I changed the antenna for the navigation, Sirius XM, satellite radio, all of that. Factory Hellcat 200-mile-an-hour gauges. When you start it up, Hellcat comes up in the middle. This car basically has everything a Hellcat has. The only thing that it doesn't, which it also has the lane sensing mirrors, it does not have the electronically adjustable steering column, which I could add that as well, but I just don't think it's worth the trouble. That's pretty much it for the interior. I'll run through just some video of it so you can get a better look at it. All right, from the back, here you have the rear door panel, which has the Hellcat speakers. I upgraded the entire speaker system when I had the interior part as well, which the Pursuits do not have rear door speakers, so I had to custom wire those in. Rear heated seats, fold down center console. I added the lights also, the handles and lights in the back on the headliner. The Pursuits just have empty fill-in panels there, since they're usually, the cars are being used for prisoner transport. Another question I get a lot: why do I have a Dodge airbag without the SRT badge in it? And the answer for that is I don't want to spend $1,000 for a backlit SRT airbag when this one works exactly the same as the Hellcat airbag. I did also add the Hellcat overhead console, which has the 3 home link buttons. Some Pursuits have overhead consoles, but none of them have the home link as far as I know. And then I also switched out the dashboard badge for SRT with the cat head. It said Charger before. That little piece was kind of costly. It was about 50 bucks. And now I also changed out the Hellcat control panel right here with the SRT button and all of that. Hellcat screen, Hellcat 200 mile an hour gauges, cat head pops up when it powers up. And I think that's about it for the interior. I hope everyone liked this video, and hopefully it explained, answered a lot of questions that a lot of you have been sending my way about what had to be done to build this car, what had to be done, additional stuff I did to it. I do not recommend it with a Pursuit. I would say get a civilian model, do it with that, save yourself a lot of trouble. But if you have any questions, let me know. I actually wrote up an article in detail on everything I had to do to build this car, list of all the parts I had to buy. Another thing that I recommend is, if you want to do a build like this, buy a crate. You know, there are companies out there, I won't, endorse certain ones on this video, but there are companies out there that buy wrecked Hellcats, factory Hellcats. They take all the parts, put them into a crate, everything you need to do the build, everything, all the wiring, the modules, the engine, transmission, everything you need. And to basically, once the crate shows up, you take the parts out of that, throw them into the car that you're building, and it's a lot more simple, save yourself a lot of time. Another thing to consider too, when you're looking at the cost of a build. Now, this car probably have about $35,000 in it total. That includes the car itself, that includes painting it twice, window tint, body panels, everything. Now, that's minus the money that I made back from selling the factory parts. I sold the factory engine, the transmission, the rack and pinion, the cooling system. All of those parts that I took off, I resold. So now if you consider before I resold those parts, you're probably looking at more like, I don't know, 42,000 in it. Now, all of the parts in this car, when I did the build, were either brand new or had at most 4,000 miles on it. The engine transmission had 1,500, cooling system had 1,500. Pretty much everything else had 4,000 miles, if not brand new. So the mileage on the dash reflects most of the car, which is currently 22,000 miles. When I finished, it had 9,000 miles on the dash. Actually had 4,000 miles on the dash when I finished, because that's where most of the parts came from. So I had 4,000 on the dash, 4,000 mile Hellcat for $35,000. It's a lot better than what they're going for right now. Used ones right now aren't going for less than usually about $60,000, and that's a used 2015 with 100,000 miles on it. So I'm sure I'll be doing a lot more unique builds. I don't know that I'll do one this extensive again, but I like doing custom work to cars. Also, it's not exactly for sale on the market, but if you're interested in this car, you're just crazy about this car, send me a message. I might let it go, but not for 35.